So here we have a Vanderbilt ACT10 or ACT10 keypad wired to our controller. So we are using our controller to power the keypad as well. So over at this side we have our LAN port and our 12 volt in to power our board. Over here, red wires 12 volts out, black wires your ground, which is coming along here through the hole and into your power supply here on the keypad. We have then looped a little wire here from 12 volt over to the common, and then we have taken the normally open from this terminal and brought this round to input 1 on our controller. So what happens then, if we enter correct code, we can trigger the input. So you can obviously have a timed relay here, or you can have it switching states. I'm just going to trigger the programming mode, which will trigger the input here. So as you can see, that grants us into programming mode, but it's actually triggered the relay over here. Only stays on for a brief while, so a bit more programming to do here to get it to toggle states rather than a timed relay. But that is the basic setup. There shouldn't be any change to the wire, and it'll be programming on the keypad after this. So setting a user on an ACT keypad, a Vanderbilt ACT10 keypad, to have a toggled relay rather than a timed relay. So to do that, we go into programming mode. You press X and put in your programming engineer's code, which by default is 9999. We want to set our output, so it's option 1. And then we want to pick our user. So I'm going to pick user 1, and then we're going to set the output function. So to use toggled, we're going to set it to 0. And that should be that. And come out of our programming mode. So if we now try our pin codes, so we have our controller over here powered by 12 volts, and we have 12 volts out going into the keypad, into the power in on the keypad, 12 volts in. And we have a little wire then from the plus 12 volts across to the common on the output, the first output relay, and then the normally open then wire we have coming out of there and coming back across to our input on our controller. And the circuit is then, so because of the loop, it's getting 12 volt into this circuit, it's coming back into the input, it will trigger the input, and then the circuitry in here will actually complete the circuit to the 12 volts that we're using to power everything. So if I now enter our code, you can see our relay input has triggered. We have a flashing green light, which you can use if we're having this to arm the CCTV. This would indicate that the system is armed. Our input is triggered, and we have our smart rules on our controller that is then arming our CCTV. If we enter our code again, our input has gone out on our board and our flashing green light has gone off. Maybe you want to do it the other way around because this is labelled as access granted. Up to yourself. We then I have user 3, which is just set to the default settings, which triggers the input but goes off after a few seconds, 5 seconds I think it is, and it's gone off. So you can obviously change that timer. So you could set a time for, I'm not sure what it allows to be honest, but if you wanted to, you could try and set that up for 30 minutes. You put a code in and it would disarm the CCTV for 30 minutes. It's a possibility that I must try out for a future video. But by default, that's the setting that a user is on, basically to unlock a door. So you need to change the user then to toggle the relay rather than a timed relay. As I say, we have set up our user 1 to have the toggled relay, which triggers your input, and it will stay triggered now until we put our code back in there. So pretty simple to wire up. So we have wired up output 1 of our controller across here, so common and normally open, coming across to our input on our ACT keypad. So you've got 0 volts going to common, and you have normally open coming into the airlock or interlock input on here. And what we're going to do is turn our keypad over, and we're going to program that so that it becomes our fire alarm override. So if we enter programming mode by pressing X and putting in our engineer code, and then if we press 45 for fire alarm override and then change that to 1. So it was off by default and it is now set to 1. So what should happen now is if we trigger our output on the app, our keypad has changed to show that it has been armed. So we've wired up our feedback loop where we have our output here, our common and our normally open coming across and going into our input, 0 volts and the interlock and the inputs on the keypad. So that so now it's a case of we have a feedback loop between the inputs and the outputs of everything. So I can press the button on our app, which will trigger the input on the keypad, trigger in the relay, which triggers the input here, and I can disarm that and you can see the keypad has changed status and the input has changed status. What we can also do then is enter our pin number into the keypad, which changes the status of the keypad, which has changed the status of the input. We then have a rule on our board on our app that when the input changes status, it also changes the status of our button on the app. So if you watch over at the app here, this has changed status, this has changed status, this has changed status, and this has changed status. And if we do that again, we'll see them all change. And if we press our button, it does it all via the app as well. So you have a feedback loop there where you can use basically the keypad or the app to trigger the button, and you can have that button linked to a CCTV system or any of these other buttons to do whatever automations you want to do.